Hello everyone and welcome to the round glass review for the Meike 50mm f1.8 autofocus lens. This lens was released in 2024. Typical lens uses are going to include general photography, but because it's a 50mm lens, but honestly I'm going to argue that because this lens has no spherical elements and there is slight aspherical aberration softness in the images, especially wide open, that makes this lens really a stellar performer for portraits on any of the formats that it can be used on. That's what I would use this lens for. For your bottom line up front, for full frame users, this lens is fine, but it's far from the best 50mm f1.8 lens that you could get. For crop sensor users who want a good portrait lens, this is an affordable and capable lens. Your focal length and angle of view are 50mm and 46.4 degrees on full frame, 75mm and about 31.2 degrees on APS-C. The aperture range is 1.8 through 16. Element and group count are 11 and 7. The design type. Now, I did, when I made the comparison video with this and the other 50mm lenses, think that this was an Ultron, but I've revised that opinion and I would say now it's probably a sonar type lens. To check me on that, take a look at the diagram and then cover the middle singular element, which I believe is the internal focusing element, with your finger. And now it looks like a complex sonar. Filter size is 58mm. The closest focus is 63 centimeters, which in the US is the appropriate length of an Italian beef sandwich. The drive type is a stepper autofocus motor, and you can have fly-by-wire manual focus if you enable it on your camera or flip the autofocus manual focus switch on the lens. The native mounts are Sony E, Nikon Z, and Leica L. The dimensions are 103 by 73 millimeters, and the weight is 328 grams. This is a fantastic lens for portraits. I know I've said it, and I'm going to say it again here. This is the best tip I've got for you. I would suggest that that's where this lens be used. Portraits. It's too big, and it has too long of a minimum focal length to be useful as a general use walk-around lens. So, really, bust it out when you've got a person in front of your camera. Next up, and only my second of two tips for this video, to my eye, this lens performs best at the portrait focus distance of around 1 meter. At infinity, this is an incredibly unremarkable lens. Closer than 1 meter, and this lens really gets soft fast. Starting with the colored lights and the lens at infinity focus, we see incredibly even illumination of each light, no onion rings, no spherical aberration undercorrection, and almost no spherical aberration overcorrection. I mean, this is an incredible performance. Does that performance hold up at close focus? It does, with the caveat that there is some overcorrection of spherical aberration in the green and blue channels, but it's minimal. If you want to create portraits with glowing lights in the background, this lens will deliver that image aesthetic incredibly well. Taking a look at the entire dots test chart, I took this photo a long time ago. That is an old test chart. We can see right off the bat some red fringing here, which indicates a spherical aberration glow. Okay, basically, when you have spherical aberration, that glow around white to dark transitions introduces a color channel glow. Okay, you can also see some blurring of the dots at the very perimeter of the full frame area, which we're going to see when we get into the 100%. But by and large, the performance here is pretty good and pretty predictable from the center to the edges. Going to the center, very center here at 100%, you can see that red glow I was talking about. This is your spherical aberration glow. And there is also a bit of softness, even though you can see through that softness that this is a generally fairly sharp lens. We're going to go here to the top left corner, and you can start to see some of that blurring in the image. And that blurring that you're seeing is because it's because of the diagonal shape there, it's some tangential astigmatism, basically. In the top right corner, we see more of the same. It's a little bit soft, indicating a slight misalignment of my monitor and the image sensor, although I will say that the pixels in the monitor you can see are fairly well rendered in this image. In the bottom right corner, we see basically more of the same, a little bit more of the tangential astigmatism, and in the bottom left, again, more of the same. And you can see also, by the way, when you see the tangential astigmatism in these 100% crops, you can see that they also have color flare in that astigmatism blur, which means that it's astigmatism mixed with bit of the spherical aberration, and that's what's causing that channel shift with the astigmatism blur. So really wish I had the more complete test image for this photo, because when I took these photos, because I think it might have revealed a few very interesting things. Breathing is interesting. Over this test, 0.7 meter throw, because it goes from the closest focus point of the lens over that 0.7 meter distance. There is some breathing at a typical lens use distance, and it could be noticeable in video. Really, this is not a lens I would say is ideally suited for video use. The aperture is controlled on the camera, and it does stop down in noticeable shifts when the camera dial changes. Again, this is not an ideal lens for video, and definitely not for changing aperture in video. The front element is stationary and non-rotating because this lens has internal focusing. Focus damping is not applicable because this lens has fly-by-wire manual focusing. I personally find the lens's focus ring to be too easy to turn, though I will say the width of the focusing ring on this lens is perfect. Sharpness is lacking for many uses, but perfect for portraits, especially wide open. This is not a technical lens in that it does not seek technical perfection, and it is really meant to be more of a portrait lens that will hide many of your subject's minor blemishes. Build quality is only okay even for the cost. The overall lens feel is kind of plasticky, and it feels imprecise. I don't have a better word for that, but the handling is generally okay. Now, that may also be a perception based solely on the outside of this lens being entirely plastic. Who knows? Maybe all the important bits about the construction inside are perfect and good. I didn't take this lens apart to find out. Contrast from this lens is very strong, even in RAW. This is a lens that makes colors pop through the relatively strong contrast compared to similar lenses. Aperture stars, as we discussed in the budget 50mm showdown video, are not really this lens's strong suit. They are fine at f11 and f16, but otherwise there's simply nothing of interest to report. This does mean that for night portrait shoots, you would need to use f11 or f16 and jack the ISO way up in order to get the stars in your image and have a close-up subject. But that's going to be hard to pull off without a lot of help in post-processing. The other option, I guess, would be to use a dim strobe and a long shutter speed and just not have your subject move. Anyway, that's a specialist singular use. You don't really have to worry about it, I'm sure. Out of focus areas are pretty good and pleasing to look at in general. Blurry areas can be used with images created by this lens to quite good effect, either as an image element or as a means to isolate your subject when you take portraits. Distortion is strongly pincushion, and you don't even need the yellow lines to see that. Light loss is noticeable until f2.8, and a hint of darkness remains at the corners through f5.6. Illumination then through f16 is very uniform. Flare and ghosting are something I never experienced with this lens. This may be in part due to the very long hood, though. And balance with cameras is fine for cameras of any weight, because this is a pretty light lens. Now that said, it is also a very large lens, and small cameras like compact APS-C bodies may have a strange handling feel to them with this lens due to the size differences between this lens and the camera. It really does feel more like a telephoto lens on a small camera than a normal lens.